Today on the Communicative Leader, we are looking at the path to leadership mastery. And with us, we have Eric Pfeiffer. He shares his journey into leadership coaching and the need for a leadership operating system. Eric is the founder and CEO of MPWR Coaching, and his unique approach focuses on developing, again, this leadership operating system. So again, more on that, but it provides a framework for leaders to solve problems, communicate effectively, and make decisions. Hello, and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Eric, I'm so thrilled to be chatting with you today and learning more about you and the amazing work that you do in this arena. And before we dive in, can you give us a little of your background and kind of how you got started in leadership coaching?
Absolutely. Well, Leah, Dr. O, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a privilege and a pleasure. So my foray into leadership coaching, it probably started like many others, which is in my 20s and early 30s. I was just trying to figure out how to be a leader. And quite frankly, I don't think I had a handle on what that meant for me. I'd read a lot of books up to that point. I did a master's that did a lot of focus on leadership and organizational leadership. And but what I did know is that I wanted to be able to take on greater roles and responsibility, which meant I was going to have more influence over teams and over parts of organizations. And two things kind of collided. One, my desire to be a good leader and not quite sure what that meant or what it should look like. Aside from, what did my parents do and what were some of my professors? What did they do? My coaches in sports, how did they operate? A few bosses I'd had up to that point. But that collided also with constant feedback that my influence in different areas of engaging other people wasn't always being received well. Surprise, surprise. I was stepping on people's toes. I was making decisions in isolation. I wasn't very collaborative. And a lot of that, not because I was intentionally trying to be an ineffective leader. I just didn't really understand the kind of what I would call a kind of core skill set of how do you lead well and what is leadership for and what's the purpose of it. So anyways, that my personal journey, my personal struggles over many years, I think began to open my eyes to realize, you know what, in my conversations with friends and coworkers and people that I had traveled at that time to work with were communicating very similar struggles and frustrations. And everybody was, picking up the latest and greatest new book on leadership, going to a conference back then. We didn't have many podcasts back then. I'm dating myself. But just trying to gather resources. But at the end of the day, we were gathering tons of great resources, but still not quite sure how to bridge the gap between the theoretical, the principles that we were reading about, and our everyday practice of leadership. And so that created a desire in me to start asking the question, well, how can I begin to bridge that gap? And how can I help others maybe pick up on some of the key things that I've learned in my own journey of trying and working, and hopefully some would suggest becoming a better leader over the years.
Yes, excellent. And good on you, because I notice a lot in consulting work, people say, well, I step on toes, I make decisions in isolation, but that's me.
Right.
And that's it. They stop. And nope, we don't need to stop there, and we shouldn't stop there. And that's amazing that you're engaging in those conversations and so open to that self-reflection, and you're sharing it with others. I really love that.
I appreciate that. And I'll tell you what, those exact phrases did come out of my mouth in those earlier years, because I think there's a part of us that wants to justify how we're operating by virtue of, well, this is my personality, right? As soon as we start learning some personality assessments and understanding our wiring, we're looking really not for the rationale for why our leadership is effective, but why we don't have to change, why we don't have to become more effective than we already are.
Yes. And I think that's a really nice segue. So my next question Everyone has their own take on leadership coaching, and I think you've kind of already hinted at some of this. But Eric, what is your unique approach to, leadership coaching and interacting with others and helping them achieve where they want to be?
Absolutely. It's a great question. As a professor, you'll know that you have all these young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed,
Mm-hmm.
aspiring leaders. They want to have
Mm-hmm.
influence and impact on the world around them. They want to feel like their engagement in the workplace is more than just being a cog in a machine. But they want to feel like they're having some significant impact. They feel purposeful beyond just their own little, cubicle and their responsibilities. And that was very much a part of my journey. And like I said earlier, in reading all of these amazing books
Mm-hmm.
and picking up on all this amazing literature and, the conferences, and you're gathering all of these great ideas. The way that I like to
Mm-hmm.
think of it is, like on our smartphones, right? We have these incredible devices that allow us to go, for example, to the Apple App Store, and there's
Yeah.
millions of apps that we can
Mm-hmm.
download. And each of those apps represents a particular problem we're facing and a particular solution. And my experience in reading so much leadership content was that I was getting a lot of great, effective, but very focused apps.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was missing, and I didn't realize this until years later, is that the reason these devices are so powerful is because somebody did the hard work to develop or create the operating system, which is
Mm-hmm.
the parental program, as it
Yeah.
were. Now I know some computer
Mm-hmm.
scientists are gonna, they're gonna attack me because of my lack of
Yeah.
knowledge in this front. But I think this is pretty accurate that the operating system that we don't
Mm-hmm.
really think much about. We just know that
Yeah.
every once in a while there's an automatic update that happens while we're sleeping.
Yes.
But it's that parental
Mm-hmm.
program that
Mm-hmm.
really is responsible for leveraging, stewarding, resourcing all of the different applications. So, to
Mm-hmm.
play that analogy out, what I realized is I had a lot of apps. I was trying to do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different things in the space of leadership, but had no kind of overarching
Mm-hmm.
parental program to help me understand when do I, where
Mm-hmm.
do I
Yep.
utilize all of these different leadership apps that I've picked up over the
Mm-hmm.
years. And so I've spent probably 13 years under a former mentor who helped me
Mm-hmm.
in this process. And then the last probably 10 years developing what we call a leadership operating system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just describe the unique difference between a
Yeah.
leadership operating system, which I don't know that we may have one of the only ones out there.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes what we run across is when we download a leadership app or read a great book, right, on some
Mm-hmm.
singular idea that
Yeah.
really kind of hits us in a great spot,
Mm-hmm.
we usually develop a tool or a principle that allows us to solve one or two problems
Yep.
that are immediate problems in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. Where a leadership operating system gives us the unique capacity to solve
Mm-hmm.
not one or two specific problems, but to diagnose, address, and solve
Mm-hmm.
millions and millions of
Yep.
problems, even ones that we've not yet been confronted by.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I tell people, I say, from your earliest years, from your parents, from your teachers, from your coaches, from your whatever mentors, bosses, we have actually developed our own internal operating system. And the way I define that is kind of the prevailing attitudes and behaviors that we carry into any situation
Mm-hmm.
that we're confronted by. And some of that operating system is effective and it helps us achieve great
Yeah.
things. And some of our operating system is not so helpful and it actually creates more problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so our desire is to give leaders an operating system that they, their team, or their organization can download, which is comprised
Mm-hmm.
by a set of core visual tools
Mm-hmm.
that if we're all running the same operating system, guess what?
Yes.
Now
Yeah.
communication,
Yeah.
problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
decision making, all of those
Mm-hmm.
features, which I believe are what make leadership and business so difficult,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly
Yeah.
become so much simpler because we're all
Mm-hmm.
speaking the same language. We're
Yep.
all committed to operating in a very similar way, regardless of our backgrounds and our
Mm-hmm.
preferences and our personalities. And what we've discovered is for those teams and organizations who do the work to download this operating system, it radically transforms their ability to solve problems, which I tell people
Mm-hmm.
as often as I can. And for your young listeners out there, I tell them
Yeah.
as often as I can, we think the higher you go in leadership is a bigger paycheck, which that's often true,
Mm-hmm.
but that it's almost like, well, the higher we go, the
Mm-hmm.
easier it gets, the less problems I'm going to have to deal with. I'm
Oh.
no longer in the trenches. And I tell people
Yeah.
that is the absolute
No.
opposite of what happens. The higher you
Yep.
go, the more
Mm-hmm.
problems, more
Mm-hmm.
money, more problems.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
and actually that much more
Mm-hmm.
important that we develop
Mm-hmm.
our cognitive skill set that allows us to identify, diagnose, and solve high level problems. And that's exactly what this operating system does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that illustration. It's so helpful. And too, as a leadership communication scholar, I just love that you're giving people a lens rather than like, here is your conflict tool to pull out, and here's your listening tool to pull out. Oh, and you have a coaching tool. And that doesn't really help. It can help us time to time, and
Yeah.
we can patch things together. But like you said, when we're all using the same operating system, wow, talk about a powerful team.
Absolutely. And again, that operating system has been developed, tried, tested,
Mm-hmm.
recalibrated over and over again.
Yep.
And what I encourage leaders to think about is, you know, the operating systems on our phones are constantly updating, right? So we're no
Mm-hmm.
longer using the same version of the operating system that we started with. It's continually updating. And as leaders, we need the ability to continually update our own leadership or personal operating system as we continue to face new challenges and want to grow and evolve ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And so, with that, I bet some of what you have learned and what you're doing has come from these two amazing books that you've written, Transform Your Trajectory and Leadership Gravitas. So, can you give us a little bit, maybe the inspiration that led to these books and just anything else that you want to share in regard to this writing?
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's a variety of reasons that somebody might write a book.
Mm-hmm.
And in my former organization, which was also a coaching business,
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate enough to be a part of the team that was in charge of content development and curation. And so we wrote a bunch of books, and I learned a little bit like, wow, there's a lot of different reasons to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, for our coaching business, we started the coaching business, and we're really focused on the proof in the pudding. Is this going to work? Is this operating system going to transform leaders, teams, organizations? Are people going to be willing to pay? Which is an
Yeah,
important part of business for
exactly.
those entrepreneurs out there. Somebody needs to
Mm-hmm.
want to pay for this.
Yeah.
And once we were a few years in and realized this is
Mm-hmm.
actually working, I realized we need to basically introduce ourselves to this
Mm-hmm.
industry and to the world. And so the first book, Leadership Gravitas, was written with the purpose of kind of like to act like a calling card. When we would run
Okay.
across people, we just
Yeah.
handing this book out and saying, this is who we
Mm-hmm.
are. If this
Mm-hmm.
conversation sounds interesting, if the problems you're personally facing resonate with the problems that we address in the book, then a conversation may be helpful. The second purpose is one of my kind of overarching life missions
Mm-hmm.
is to put these tools from this operating system, there's
Mm-hmm.
8 core tools, into the hands of as many leaders as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And therefore, the book allows us to disseminate. That first book revolves
Mm-hmm.
around kind of our first core tool, our DNA tool, which gives us a framework for the kind of leader we want to be and the kind of culture that we want to
Yeah.
create. And then the second book was written in the same vein. We just basically said, okay, it's time to put the second core tool out into
Mm-hmm.
the world to give people access to that. And so Transform Your Trajectory
Mm-hmm.
again revolves around another core tool that gives us an opportunity to identify the opportunities in our lives, in our daily kind of going ons,
Mm-hmm.
where there's opportunity to learn, to respond, to experience personal
Mm-hmm.
transformation and communal transformation. And so the hope is we're going to release, each of the core tools book
Yeah.
by book. But I just recently somebody said, "Hey Eric, you know what? If the next book you could just release a kind of brief introduction to the entire operating system, because
Yeah.
that
Yep.
concept is so unique." And I thought that's
Mm-hmm.
a great idea. So the next book that
Yep.
I've already started on will release
Yeah.
a brief introduction to this leadership operating system.
Congratulations. And what an impressive calling card. So most people will hand you a business card or maybe a shiny fact sheet, but like I really appreciate the effort and thought that went into that. That is really
Oh,
cool.
well, you've written books, it's a labor of
Yeah,
love.
it
Because
is.
you're
Yep.
thinking, is
Yep.
anybody
You
going to
gotta
care about this?
really
Does
love
anybody
this.
want to
Yep.
read this? Is this going to help anybody? Every sentence I pause and I have a moment, a crisis of confidence.
Yes.
So
Yep.
obviously, it's a labor of love, but at the same time, um, it is still one of the key ways that we're able to share ideas
Yeah.
and give people who may not be able to afford the high level coaching that we provide
Yeah.
for large organizations an opportunity to be exposed to these ideas and actually to experience their own personal transformation.
Yeah. So let's think more about your most recent book, Transform Your Trajectory. Can you share a key insight that leaders and organizations can implement right away? Something that can, that everyday talk or group functioning. What would you say?
There's so many. I'll pick one. So the book again revolves around one of our core tools called the Kairos Circle.
Okay.
And the word kairos is a Greek word that some people are familiar with, but it's the one of the Greek words for time, the word we have for time.
Yeah.
And the other Greek word is chronos, which we're more familiar with because that's where we come up with chronological.
Yeah.
And so chronos time in the Greek culture is really sequential time. It's calendar time, stopwatch time. It's linear time. But the Greeks understood the importance of identifying that in our chronos timeline of life, every day, every hour, every month, every year, a lifetime, that we are constantly experiencing significant moments in that chronological timeline that are important for us to slow down, to pay attention to them. Why? Because the experiences of our life. So this is just a little caveat for the young people out there that are still in schooling or leaders who once they left school have kind of bought into this idea that like that season of my life is over. I've learned what I need to learn. Now it's time to go be a professional. And I tell people, no, the goal is to be a lifelong learner. So this Kairos Circle, this tool, equips us first and foremost with the ability to identify those experiences in our lives that are absolutely ripe with learning, with opportunities for personal growth, development, transformation, with new insights, with wisdom. So when people ask me, how do I increase my wisdom, my understanding, my insights, my capacity as a leader? And I said, you can continue to download all the latest content and just shovel that into your mouth. And that's not bad because a lot of good content out there. The problem is we don't always know how to, this is not the right word, but I don't know why it comes on, to matriculate or to process or digest the content and the life experiences we're having. So what this tool does, it gives us a simple process to identify these Kairos moments in our everyday lives and the ability to digest those experiences or things that we're reading in a book or hearing on a podcast so that they actually benefit us, so that we actually get the nutrients from that learning into our minds and into our inner persons so that they actually help us grow, develop, strengthen, increase our capacity.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking the other day, someone asked me, like, what is the single most important thing a leader can do? Which is such a big question, but I boiled it down. I said self-reflection.
Yeah.
And that's what you're really getting at and giving people the tools because telling someone to go reflect, I mean, from sending a small child to timeout to, having a manager say, oh, well, maybe we think about that.
Yeah.
It's so obscure and abstract. And so thank you for helping people think through what that actually can look like and how to do that.
Well, it's the phrase that I often encourage people with is we have to learn how to learn.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we've learned in a particular methodology. Now, no offense to the academic world, but we all know that a lot of our experience, at least through our undergrad and college, is a lot of information acquisition and regurgitation.
Yes.
Right? We're memorizing bits of information so that we can pass a test, and then a lot of that stuff just goes out the window.
Yeah.
but how do we actually develop the cognitive skill set to learn from whatever it is that we're experiencing? Because reading a book is not the same as learning. Listening to a podcast is not the same as learning, because we can hear a lot of information, but without the ability to properly digest that information, extract, like I said earlier, the nutrients, and leverage that to work for us, then what I find is people stop learning. We plateau in our learning. And so, like you said, self-awareness, that's, that's leadership 101. We all have to practice. Then you ask people, how do you practice self-awareness? And they're, I don't know. I said, okay, no problem. That's why we've developed these simple tools, this operating system that equips people with practical, very simple, practical handles on how to do these things that matter so very much.
Yeah, that is incredible. And now let's think about your first book. And I haven't had a chance to read this, and I can't wait to read it. And I just love the title. So, Leadership Gravitas. So, I'm wondering if you could share with us your philosophy on developing gravitas, and why is it so important for leaders to possess the quality?
Oof. So the title, Leadership Gravitas, was a phrase that I stumbled upon many, many years ago, because gravitas is not a kind of a common word in most people's vocabulary. We have a sense of what it means, but I got it from the imagery of kind of the laws of physics, that in planetary orbits, it's the planets of smaller mass that revolve around the planets of larger mass. And that became an image in my mind of, gosh, I want to be the kind of leader that other people feel safe, feel confident, feel encouraged to revolve around, to follow. In other words, a phrase that we often say is we ask the question, are you a leader worth following? Because a title and a position in an organization does not necessarily mean you're a good leader. It doesn't mean that people trust you. It doesn't mean that people respect you. It doesn't mean that people feel empowered by you. And so I remember in those early years of my own leadership struggles, which, by the way, they never end. I'm still struggling in my leadership to get to new levels. But I remember thinking, I want to be the kind of leader that other people are thankful for, are grateful for, the kind of leader that younger or other leaders aspire to say, I want to be like that person, like Eric as a leader. And so I set out on this adventure to ask the question, what are those qualities? What are those characteristics that the leaders, in all of history? So I did a lot of research, a lot of study, a lot of reading to ask the question, what are those qualities, right? And not just, there are certain qualities in our contemporary culture that we latch onto. And we would suggest, well, if you don't have these qualities like Elon Musk, or if you don't have these qualities like a Mark Zuckerberg, or, like a Jeff Bezos, then you can't be an entrepreneur. You can't be an effective leader. And what I realized, that's absolutely not true. They may have some unique qualities that I do not have, but those are not the qualities that determine the effectiveness of a leader. And so what I did was just basically acquire those characteristics and those qualities, and began to aggregate them, and then eventually developed what we call the EQ matrix, EQ standing for emotional intelligence, because that became kind of a banner or phrase, created by Daniel Goleman, that I could say, leaders who operate with gravitas. In other words, when the world is unstable or uncertain around you, with an ever-changing landscape where everything is always in transition, especially nowadays with technology, things are changing a mile a minute. How do we keep up? What is our ability under mounting pressure to continue to operate as the best version of ourselves? And I mean the best version of ourselves today, because I want to be a better version tomorrow. But today, in the midst of all the pressures and all the uncertainty and all the challenges that we're facing as humans and as leaders, what is my ability to maintain the best version of myself? Because that will likely determine other people's ability, their sense of safety, security, to be able to follow me, to participate in whatever it is that I'm running after. And quite frankly, it was also a study of all of the leaders that I had up to that point in my life, and realized some of those leaders I loved for particular qualities, but there were very few of those leaders that I thought, I trust them, I want to follow them, I want to participate or be a part of whatever they're doing. And so extracting those characteristics, and then attaching them to a simple visual tool so that
Mm-hmm.
any person at any age in any context can begin that journey of asking the questions, how do I develop these skills? How do I increase
Mm-hmm.
these qualities? And what we find in my own life
Yeah.
journey and
Mm-hmm.
with the leaders we work with is, guess what? As they focus not on trying to, quote unquote, be a better leader, because that can
Mm-hmm.
feel like an enigma,
Yep.
but as they focus on growing and developing these simple skills, these simple qualities, guess what? The testimony of the people around them is, I feel like you're more trustworthy. I feel like you're safer to be
Mm-hmm.
around. I feel like I respect you more. I feel like I'm willing to go with you into difficult times.
Yeah.
I want to participate in what you're up to and where you're going. And so that's the beautiful thing, is that we're all wanting to be better leaders. We don't know what that means, and I think we need a different pathway that says, "Hey, let's
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost become the kind of people,
Yes.
the
Yep.
quality of people that other people want to
Mm-hmm.
follow." And that is how we develop our leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. And exactly. And I'm just thinking too, like when we're focusing on being the best version of ourselves, we're modeling that for those in our team, right? And then, like you said, we have trust, we have respect. We're more committed even when things are really challenging, and that's magic,
Yeah.
right? The amount of time we spend at work or working is staggering. And to be
Yes.
able to have someone like that at the helm is a gift.
Oh gosh. And here's interesting, Leah. A question that I get asked very often by
Mm-hmm.
leaders is, first of all, what the heck is culture? That's one question
Yeah.
I get all the time, because there's a million books out there and everyone's
Mhm.
talking about the
Yes.
importance of
Yep.
transforming or
Hmm.
creating a healthy or a psychologically
Yeah.
safe culture, an emotionally intelligent culture. That's the first question. What
Yes.
the heck is
Yep.
culture anyway?
Yeah.
And then the second question is it possible for me as a leader, even if I don't have the ultimate authority,
Yeah.
is it possible for
Hmm.
me to actually have significant influence and be a transformative agent in this
Hmm.
culture? Because I think a lot of times people are excited to jump into a new team, a new organization, a new
Yep.
division, a new career, and
Yep.
they get involved. And in the beginning, it's, man, optimism and bright eyed,
Yeah.
bushy tailed, and this is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Everyone's amazing. And then after a few hours or a few days, it's like, man, this place sucks. Everyone's grumpy and frustrated, and people
Yeah.
gossiping and talking behind people's backs, and
Yes.
people are
Yeah.
there's power playing going all over the place.
Hmm.
And so here are the two things. The way I define culture is simply this, and it's going to sound silly,
Hmm.
but bear with me. I define culture as this. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
This is how we do it, right? The
Hmm.
prevailing
Hmm.
attitudes and behaviors
Yeah.
of the people in any context will determine the prevailing culture, right? Culture is just the kind of
Yep.
some expression of the prevailing
Hmm.
attitudes, behaviors. And so what I tell leaders is that if you want to change culture, then you have to understand how bread is made, right? Because
Mm.
as a Southern Californian, we don't, we
Hmm.
go, vegetables grow on the shelves of the grocery
Yeah.
store. Bread
Yeah.
somehow appears in a bag in the grocery store. We have no
Hmm.
concept usually of how this is made. And so I remember one day my wife making homemade bread at home.
Hmm.
And the first thing that surprised me was that there was only a few ingredients, right? Because if you look on a
Yeah.
package of bread,
Yeah.
it's like
It's
25
amazing.
ingredients and it's all
Yes. Yep.
preservatives. And so she's got the flour and the water and the eggs, and she
Hmm.
mixes it all
Hmm.
together, and it turns into this big lump of
Hmm.
dough. And then she goes into the refrigerator and she pulls out this little
Hmm.
bottle, and on the bottle it says
Hmm.
yeast. And I
Yep.
think that sounds disgusting. I've
Yeah.
only heard that
Yeah.
word associated with a few
Babies is
things.
okay. Yeah.
I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And I said to my wife, I
Uh,
said, "What is that?"
mhm.
And she said, "Oh gosh, I'm surprised you don't know this." And I said, "Well,
Mhm.
explain it." She said,
Mhm.
"This is the yeast. This is leaven."
Mhm. Mhm.
And having spent a lot of years in kind of more of a religious context, I'd always heard
Mhm.
this parable of
Yep.
Jesus where he
Yep.
teaches a little leaven leavens the whole
Mhm.
lump. So she takes this very
Mhm.
small dash of leaven and she puts it into this very large lump of dough, and then she begins to knead the leaven in. And I think that
Mhm.
little bit of leaven isn't going to make any
Yeah.
changes. And
Mhm.
then she sets it aside, she covers it up, and she comes back an hour later, and that little lump of dough has expanded. Right? It has expanded because it's created all these air bubbles within the
Yep.
bread. It's expanded and is now so much larger than it was previously. And so I tell
Mhm.
people, I said, don't underestimate your unique
Mhm.
ability to transform the culture of your workplace, of your household, of
Mhm.
your friendship group, of whatever context you find yourself in. But here's the first order of business. You have to change the way that you do things. You have to commit to a set of attitudes and behaviors that reflect the kind of culture that you want to fight for. And then you have to commit to operating by those attitudes and behaviors consistently. And you're going to go against the grain and you're going to feel like you're swimming upstream. But as you continue to do that, guess what? You will be the leaven that has a catalytic, transformative impact on your environment. Because guess what? People are drawn to health. People are drawn to life. If what's coming out of you is more life-giving, it's healthier, it's more effective, it brings more joy to people's lives, if it's more productive, then people will be drawn to it and will begin to ask, gosh, what are you doing different? And that's what gives people an opportunity then to begin to say, I want to adopt those attitudes and behaviors. And I've seen it happen so many times, Leah, where one leader who works with us says, my organization, my team doesn't want to go through this coaching process. No problem. Yeah. You focus on you. And as they focus on themselves and they experience transformation, they become the new culture. And then they're consistently in that old culture. It begins to catalyze transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. I love all those illustrations. I'm very visual and that's so helpful. And yeah, letting someone know you're going to be the leaven. It doesn't
We're
take a
going to
lot.
get you our books, Leah, because
be
our
consistent.
books
revolve
around visual tools because I can't remember anything that's not attached to an image.
Exactly. Yes. I love that. So now I want to think a kind of big scale, very broad. So across all of your clients, what is the most common challenge? And maybe it was culture, maybe it's something else, but what is it that you hear most frequently that people are emailing or reaching out to you? And then, what is a follow-up step to addressing that challenge?
Most leaders, when they come to us, right? Because very, very rarely do leaders come to us on the front end of their career, of their job responsibility to say, hey, I want to get ahead of the 8 ball and I want to lead as well as I possibly can, right? Because I think every one of us is operating out of some measure of an imposter syndrome, right? I think that's normal. Imposter syndrome, I tell people, is just a fancy word for feeling insecure. Okay. And so we're all feeling a little bit insecure when we step into any role and responsibility. And so we muster up all of our strength and all of our leadership tools and skills, and we kind of go at it. And eventually what we find is we run into ongoing frustrations. We run into ongoing struggles, difficulties, challenges, dysfunctions. And what happens for leaders is over time, their inability to understand or diagnose the particular problems that are happening in their organization. And right now, I'm not talking about system structures, processes, SOPs, all that's important too. But I'm talking about the way that those human beings in any team or organization are interacting together. Because I like to think that people are the engine of any business, not the product, not the service, not the computer systems, right? I mean, AI is going to take over some things, but not everything. We're still going to need people to run stuff. And so people are the engine, and how people operate individually and collectively determines oftentimes the effectiveness, productivity of the organization. So when the engine of any team or organization is not functioning well, right? Think of the engine. When I'm driving my car, I'm not a mechanic. I just know it's in there. It's under the hood somewhere. It powers my vehicle. It helps me get from point A to point B, and I'm really grateful for it. But the most frustrating thing is when there's a light on my dashboard that comes on. And it says, hey, you're low on oil, or hey, you need to get some maintenance, or hey, there's tire pressure that's low, or hey, you need to get the engine checked, or hey, you're due for a maintenance, session. And all I can say is that I'm sure there are other people who feel this way. I always feel slightly annoyed, disrupted, inconvenienced, because I just think, why can't that engine just keep doing its job? Well, we as individuals and as teams are like that engine. We need maintenance. We need like our operating systems. We need continual upgrades and updates so that we can continue to operate effectively, especially with everything changing in the landscape of organizations. We need to continually upgrade and update our ability to face new challenges and overcome obstacles. And so when they're coming to us, it's because usually there's enough of the lights on the dashboard of their car that are now blinking at them,
flashing,
and saying, hey, you got to pay attention. to
Yep.
what's happening in your organization, and it's usually in a place that
Mm-hmm.
they're not familiar with. So now that begins, insecurity, inadequacy sets in. Leaders start
Mm-hmm.
thinking, I'm getting paid to be the leader, and I don't know how to transform the culture here. I don't know how to deal with the dysfunction in my team. I don't know how to deal
Mm-hmm.
with all this, all the drama going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that just continues to perpetuate this sense of I'm inadequate. If anybody actually finds
Yeah.
out that I don't know how to solve these problems, maybe that will
Mm-hmm.
disqualify me as a leader. And sometimes leaders sum up the courage to say, you know what,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't learn this in school, because that's the truth. I was
Yep.
never trained or equipped
Exactly.
to understand the engine of an automobile, because that's not
Yeah.
taught in your MBAs nowadays.
Yep.
Right. And so when they invite us in, um, it's what we do is we come in and we basically begin to equip them with the simple tools so that they can learn how to diagnose the engine of their business, the people, and how those people
Mm-hmm.
are operating together, and the simple maintenance procedures, the simple solutions, fixes that will get that engine running optimally again at full power, at full strength, at full efficiency. And so that's essentially what we do with leaders, teams, and organizations. And the best part
Mm-hmm.
is that we want to equip them and serve them and empower them until they can do for themselves what only we could do
Yeah.
at first, because we
Yep.
don't want them
Yeah.
dependent on us forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is incredible. So this next question is a little bit of a pivot, and I've been, just in anecdotal conversations. I've had more people, and this is, at soccer games or in the grocery store, but saying, after COVID, I'm taking a step back. I don't think I want to become a leader. I don't want the headache that comes with it. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what can our titled leaders in organizations do? How do we continue to support and empower these employees who don't have those leadership aspirations, but are still valuable in maintaining culture and fueling that work group?
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're speaking to the people who are in roles and responsibilities with a title of some kind of
Yes.
leadership. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say this is probably the simplest way to say it. I think we need a significant paradigm shift. That is, I think, happening. Like we've got what I call the prophets of our culture, the Simon Sinek's, the Brene Browns,
Mm-hmm.
these people
Yeah.
that we're all listening to going, yes, something needs
Yeah.
to change in the
Yes.
culture of how
Mm-hmm.
we operate in our organization.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dissatisfied, I'm frustrated, I'm unhappy, I feel like I'm just a cog in the machine, whatever people are saying.
Yeah.
But there's a significant amount of displeasure for most people, for a very high percentage of people, in their experience in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace.
Yep.
And oftentimes what they end up doing is blaming it on their particular role and responsibility, when I
Mm-hmm.
think it's actually has far more to do with the relational experience they're having within the workplace. That's what I think
Mm-hmm.
is where most of the stress and headaches are
Mm-hmm.
coming from. Well, if you look at and you weigh out the amount of time, energy, and resource that most organizations give to what I call the delivery of the organization, selling,
Mm-hmm.
serving,
Mm.
producing, manufacturing, packaging, whatever it is,
Yep.
lawyering, doctoring.
Yes.
There's the delivery. The mission of the organization is to deliver a
Yep.
particular product, service
Mm-hmm.
for people's consumption, and I think that's very important. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
the other side of the scale, which is development. In other
Yes.
words, how
Yep.
do we attend to the time,
Mm-hmm.
energy, and resource that we're investing into the development of the engine of this
Mm-hmm.
organization? And I would suggest that, and this is probably a very conservative and generous
Mm-hmm.
guesstimation, but it's probably around 90% of our time, energy, and resource, if not more,
Mm-hmm.
is
Yep.
devoted to the delivery side of our business,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe 10% is devoted to the development side. And the development side that is happening is largely people coming in for 3 hours to do a quick workshop, and then that person's gone. And
Yep.
we get a new person coming in every six
Yep.
months because, it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
let's get the newest idea and the newest thing.
Yes.
And
Yep.
what I find when I interview these organizations, well, how's that been
Mm-hmm.
going for you? We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, all of these amazing personalities and
Mm-hmm.
brand people to come in and inspire and motivate. And,
Yeah.
and I think, okay, and how's that working? Well, we haven't really seen any significant change. I'm like, well, so
Yeah.
basically that was a poor ROI. And
Yeah.
in the world of business, we should know better. We should look at that ROI and say, that's not delivering to us. That's not giving us the kind of qualitative experience and help that we actually really need. And so for most organizations, the thought of, because I would say we're more coaches than consultants, we like to come in and over a period of time partner with leaders, teams, organizations in a kind of significant process that is going to equip them with new tools, right? And of course, what does every leader say to me? We can't afford to meet every week for an hour on Zoom. I can tell you what, after 2 or 3 months of working with us, here's what they start saying. I can't believe we didn't do this before. Oh my gosh, we can't afford not to work with you guys every week. And that's because for the most part, I think that the ideas that are being kind of spread in the world of leadership are fantastic, largely rooted in significant principles, many repackaged in new and fresh and kind of titillating ways. But I don't know that there are a lot of significant transformative processes that are being offered in the world of coaching, at least that I've been exposed to. And part of that is because it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
It takes time. It's inconvenient and uncomfortable, right? Because everyone's going to have to get out of their comfort zone and learn and grow and develop and stretch their leadership muscles. But for those leaders, teams, organizations that choose that path, what they discover is in a very short period of time, the quality of transformation across whatever scope we're working with is radically beneficial. Like the ROI, the return on investment that they experience is so significant that they literally are over the moon. And that's how we've grown as a business, is by word of mouth. I mean, we really haven't needed time to go market ourselves as a coaching business because, one leader says to another leader, my gosh, what happened? You've experienced all this transformation. Your business is operating better. You no longer seem stressed when you come to the golf course or, when we're playing bingo or whatever. It's like, well, because we started working with this coaching group and it's literally transformed the atmosphere, the culture, the way that we operate. Our business is better. Our bottom line is better. And quite frankly, I like my life better, which is really, really important.
Yeah. I mean, talk about the best compliment, and not something people not having to actively try and push and market, and having that plan is virtually unheard of. So that is really, really incredible, Eric. I think this will be a nice segue to this. I want to ask about a success story, something that you really are proud of, whether it's an organization or particular leader or particular team. But what kind of stands out as something that, you've seen a lot of change and it just, brings a smile to your face?
Oh my gosh, Leah, I saw that question when you sent it to me in the email, and my brain was flooded with so many amazing stories. And I say that because in our coaching business, we're very disciplined to take time to recognize, acknowledge, and engage the challenges we're facing with clients, right? Because it's hard work. I call it the grind. It's a grind. But the successes, the breakthroughs that we get to see, not only for individual leaders, but for teams and for organizations at large. So can I give you 3 really quick short ones?
Please. Yeah.
So the first one was working with a female entrepreneur. She had an incredible fitness organization that was growing all over Southern California. It was booming. And she kind of dialed in the formula, right? And she was crushing it. We started working with her, and then COVID hit, which is an unexpected, significant impact on her in-person fitness business. And so she didn't know what to do. And in working with her, we did not solve her problem. We just simply walked with her, equipped her with the tools to diagnose the problem she was facing, and to begin to search out for the creative solutions. And so she transitioned during COVID to an online business, which required a new skill set from her. It was still the same core business of wanting to give people a chance to increase their fitness in a healthy, holistic way. And but through COVID, just really for a year and a half, fought, battled, really more than anything else, to overcome her own insecurities, sense of inadequacy. Can I do this? Do I have what it takes? And I just spoke with her a few weeks ago, and her business is like 50x'd. She never had even considered the possibility of what moving her business into an online format would do for her. She is reaching more people across a much greater scope of the world. She's got clients in almost every continent now. She's just absolutely crushing it, which is so encouraging. And she always looks back to that time where she says, Eric, whether it's COVID or a downturn in the market or some impact in our whatever in our getting all of our products. I never realized that challenge, which I would have thought was would have killed our business, was actually an opportunity. And the second story is a young man who was named and became one of the youngest general managers in the NBA. And those who know about NBA basketball, professional basketball, will know who I'm talking about. But he was named as one of the youngest GMs and entered into an organization that, by all accounts, was moving in a lot of different directions. And he was tasked with the responsibility, because really in professional sports, all anybody really thinks about is, we want to win a championship. We want to win a championship. Who's going to help us do that? And everybody wants overnight success. Nobody wants to do the hard work over a period of time. And so working with him to begin the process of transforming his front office, the process of creating a culture where people were more collaborative, they were no longer hoarding information, they were no longer siloed, and that took probably a year to do that. But sadly, jettisoning employees that were not interested in operating in this new culture, bringing in new people. And it radically transformed the way that organization now operates, where, from anybody who go in there would say, if you spent a day in those offices, 2 years, 3 years ago, and then you went today, you would say, this is an entirely different organization. And what I loved about him is that he chose to embrace this simple idea that we're not here to win a championship. We're here to build a championship caliber program that has just the opportunity to potentially vie for multiple championships, right? And that's the whole idea, that we have to become the transformation that we want to see in our teams and our organization. He did the hard work, that organization has been doing the hard work, which has been just so fun to watch. And then the third organization is a distributor of raw commodities, wheat, flours, all that stuff. And I remember when we first started working with this organization, it's family owned and run, multiple families involved, a lot of just your classic, power struggles and divisions and siloing and, fractures in the infrastructure. But they were wildly successful. And I tell people all the time, just because you're financially successful does not mean that you are relationally or culturally successful. And over time, every organization finds out the hard way that ultimately the culture will catch up and undermine the effectiveness of the organization, right? I think it's Peter Drucker who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's absolutely true. And so they got to the point where they were suffering from a lot of internal dysfunction. And so they brought us in, we started working with them. I'll never forget this little story. We were teaching them the tool that is introduced in Leadership Gravitas, how to identify the moments when we're triggered, our default responses, and how that impacts our environment. And then what would it look like if we chose to embrace different attitudes and behaviors, what we call the pathway of personal responsibility. And so we're leading them through this tool. We get into a call 2 weeks later. And before we jump into any more tool training, I just say, hey guys, I just want to hear what's going on. Right. In light of what we've been talking about, are you experiencing any changes or any challenges that we need to know about? And the president of the organization says, Eric, last week, an email was accidentally sent to all of our vendors with all of our price margin breakdown in the email, which would show the person that they're trying to purchase stuff from how much we're making And so it was a massive disaster. The fear of breaking trust with these people. Are you taking advantage? I mean, there was so much drama. And he said, Eric, when I had to jump into the meeting with my executive team to address this problem, I said, well, what happened? He said, it was night and day difference to how we would have normally. I said, well, how would you have normally handled it? He said, normally we would have jumped into that room. We would have immediately been pointing fingers,
Yep.
looking for a scapegoat. Who are we going to throw under the bus?
Mhm.
Who sent that email? Just fire them right now. And he
Yep.
said, instead, we realized we're all triggered. We're all tempted to go toward our default behaviors, which is to blame and deflect and project responsibility. And instead, we just decided together, what would it look like if every one of us took 100% personal responsibility for this situation? And just that shifting of their paradigm and perspective led to, he said, an incredibly different type of conversation where they were able to work together. They were able to each own
Mhm.
whatever little part they might have had in that
Yep.
situation, and they were able to solve the problem. And guess what? We can't always control the external factors, but
Yep.
that leaked email ended up not really causing any significant issues.
Mhm.
And the team from that point forward realized, wow, how we operate individually and together
Mhm.
really does matter for how we run this business. That person
Yeah.
who would have been fired stayed on
Oh,
and
yeah.
has been wildly successful. And the relational atmosphere, I like to
Mhm.
call it, right? The air we're
Yeah.
breathing when we're in the office,
Yeah.
right? It just radically shifted at
Yes.
that point, and they've just been
Yeah.
getting healthier and healthier ever since.
Yeah. That is incredible to go from finger pointing to everyone accepting their portion of the blame and saying, okay, how do we collaborate? How do we fix this instead of
Yeah.
what did you do? Excellent. Yeah, those are really incredible stories. So, Eric, two final questions for you. And this is how we end all episodes of the Communicative Leader. So, a tip, advice, challenge. So, for our titled leaders, our managers, directors, and then advice for all employees across all ranks. So, what do you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, for those people who currently have titles, roles, responsibilities that
Mm-hmm.
would suggest leadership responsibility, I would say to them, wherever you're feeling imposter syndrome, inadequacy,
Mm-hmm.
uh, ill-equipped, what I would say to them is, you should, and it's not your fault.
Yep.
You were trained for 20 plus years
Mm-hmm.
in an understanding of business that did not include perhaps one of the most important features of business, which is the engine, which is the people. And so
Yep.
instead of beating yourself up and trying to cover up whatever you're not quite sure how to do, instead choose to go on a learning journey and to
Mm-hmm.
equip yourself with the needed tools, skills that will allow you to continue to raise your game as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
and to be a leader worth following. For those people who are not titled, or even for those people, like you said earlier, who would kind of think, I don't even know if I want to be
Yep.
a leader. I don't even. Here's what
Yep.
I would say: we're all leaders. Because the
Thanks.
way I define leadership is
Mm-hmm.
influence. So you
Yep.
have influence in
Mm-hmm.
your home, in your friendship groups,
Yep.
and if you're at the golf
Mm-hmm.
course, if you're at the grocery store, if you're on the freeway, you have
Mm-hmm.
influence over the other
Exactly.
people in the different lanes.
Mm-hmm.
Like as human beings, we are all
Mm-hmm.
walking around every day with significant opportunities to
Mm-hmm.
lead, to influence, to impact people. The question is our influence and impact an asset or a liability in whatever context we find
Mm-hmm.
ourselves? That's a really important question to ask
Yep.
ourselves. Secondly,
Yep.
to choose to own the responsibility as a human being that you are a leader, you do have influence and impact,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore to go on the journey of developing your leadership gravitas, your leadership
Mm-hmm.
acumen, your skills, your capacity. Because if it's not just for the business world, it's for your marriage, it's
Mm-hmm.
for your kids, it's for your extended
Yes.
family, it's for your friendship
Mm-hmm.
circles, it's for society. Please,
Mm-hmm.
let's all
Yep.
recognize we are leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. I could not agree with you more. Exactly. It's like you're in this role whether you like it or not. So taking the time, even like a tiny step back to think about what that means in these different
Yeah.
arenas can really have some positive outcomes.
Yeah. And not to underestimate the power of our ability as individuals
Mm-hmm.
to transform, to influence the context and the cultures that we find ourselves in.
Exactly. Eric, thank you for sharing your time, your expertise. This has been such an energizing conversation.
For me
Um,
too.
oh, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the great work you're doing. Really, from what I'm doing in the classroom, from this leadership perspective, it's so nice to see people doing the good work so that organizations can fit better and feel better and be more human centered.
Well, one day, Leah, one of my dreams is that there would actually be college courses or graduate courses offered in introducing this leadership operating system to young leaders, because I just say it's never too early to start developing your leadership acumen. And if we could download this leadership operating system into people in their late teens, 20s, even their 30s, before they've reached, higher levels of leadership roles and responsibility, I just think we have an opportunity to see a vastly different cultural landscape across corporate America, because I think corporate America, quite frankly, needs saving.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yep. Well, that one is Transform Your Trajectory. And then the new one you're writing, right? So we're going to keep our eyes out for that one.
Please do.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Leah.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.